Who's actually going to get the most out of a dedicated video conferencing camera? And who would be better off sticking with a cheap webcam or a built-in laptop lens? Is the Logitech Rally Bar Mini worth the price tag for the everyday remote worker, or does it belong only in a polished boardroom? Those are the three questions I keep hearing when people hesitate at checkout, and they're the exact ones I tried to answer after spending a few days testing the bar in a real home office, a small co-working space, and a friend's conference room. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I started by looking at the promises: a 30 frames per second, flicker-free stream for digital zoom that supposedly makes distance not matter, and a wireless option that would let you ditch the cable mess. The first thing I wanted to know was whether those claims held up when I was actually trying to run a 45-minute client call, share a screen, and switch between a whiteboard and a face-to-face conversation. The Rally Bar Mini plugs into any computer with a USB 3.0 port, which means you don't need a special driver or a separate power brick. The plug-and-play nature is a relief if you're anything like me, someone who sets up a meeting room in a coffee shop on the fly. In practice, the moment I connected the unit and opened my video meeting app, the camera was recognized instantly. There was no pop-up asking me to install firmware, no confusing select input device dialogue that some USB cameras throw at you. The setup took less than 2 minutes, and the only menu I had to touch was the on-screen overlay that lets you switch between full room and speaker focus modes. Autofocus is where the Rally Bar Mini starts to show why it's positioned above the typical webcam. In a test where I moved from sitting at my desk to standing 3 meters away to point at a flip chart, the focus adjusted within a second and the image stayed sharp. That speed mattered when I was presenting a slide deck. The camera never paused long enough for the other side to wonder if I'd frozen. The 4-digital zoom also proved useful. When my team needed a closer look at a prototype, I could pull the zoom in without noticeable pixelation thanks to the 30 frames per second pipeline that keeps motion smooth, even at the highest zoom level. If you're used to software-based zoom on a laptop that ends up looking grainy, this feels like a genuine upgrade. Low-light performance is a mixed bag. The bar uses a fairly large sensor for its size, and in a dimly lit home office it produced a usable image, but there was a slight softening of colors around the edges. In a conference room lit only by a ceiling panel, the picture stayed bright enough to see facial expressions, though the skin tones leaned cooler than they would under daylight. If you rely on a single light source and you're not willing to add a softbox or ring light, you might find the image a bit washed out. On the upside, the 30 frames per second rate eliminates the flicker you sometimes see when fluorescent lights pulse at 50 Hz or 60 Hz. The video stayed steady, which is a relief when you're on a long call and don't want your skin tone to flicker like a cheap TV. Stabilization is another practical point. The Rally Bar Mini is a fixed-mount device, so you won't get the gimbal-style shake cancellation you see on action cameras, but the internal software does a good job of smoothing small motions. When I walked around the room to grab a marker, the frame held steady, and the camera quickly re-centered on my face. That means you can move a bit without worrying that your participants will see a jittery feed. It's not a substitute for a moving camera system in a large auditorium, but for rooms up to about 6 people it feels solid. One of the marketing lines says, "Get rid of the wires and go wireless." In reality, the unit ships with a USB-C cable that powers and streams the video. Logitech does offer an optional wireless transmitter, but it's sold separately and adds a few extra dollars. If you're looking for a truly cordless setup, you'll have to budget for that add-in, and you'll also need a reliable Wi-Fi connection that can sustain a 1080p 30 FPS stream. For most small team scenarios, the wired connection is more reliable, and the cable is short enough to tuck behind a monitor without creating a trip hazard. Now, who should actually consider buying this? If you run a home-based consulting business, a remote teaching gig, or a small startup that meets daily via Zoom or Teams, the Rally Bar Mini can give you a professional image without the hassle of a full-room speaker system. The quick setup, reliable autofocus, and decent zoom make it feel like you're in a conference room even when you're on a kitchen table. It also works nicely in co-working spaces where you might plug into a shared laptop. You don't have to worry about driver conflicts because it's essentially a plug-and-play webcam.